Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and variations thereof. Today I'm going to attempt to create a sophont, or alien race, using the new Traveller 5 rule set. Actually, I'm not going to generate a sophont. I'm going to convert an existing sophont into Traveller 5, fudging some of the die rolls as we go, but following the Traveller 5 rules so that A. the sophont is described in Traveller 5 terms, and B. gaps in our knowledge of the sophont are filled in. The sophont I've chosen is an obscure one called the Jaibok of Teth. They were first mentioned as the ZERP in Theta Borealis sector, a licensed supplement by Group 1. They were subsequently expanded upon by the History of the Imperium Working Group and by myself. Let's quickly review what is known of them. The Jaibok were originally omnivore eaters, living on Teth in the Thalassen sector. Teth is a fairly run-of-the-mill world orbiting a K2 main sequence star. Proto-Jaibok roamed in bands, competed fiercely with one another over food, and used hand-wielded stones as crude tools. During the ancient period, these animals were genetically manipulated, given the ability to understand and learn, and used on several worlds as foot soldiers in the Ancients' War. By the end of the war, the Jaibok were either wiped out or declined and became extinct on all worlds, including their homeworld. The exception was those on Vetch in the Mabuzog sector, who nonetheless reverted to barbarism. That surviving branch took to calling itself ZERP, or Hammer, after their original tool, and eventually reformed a civilization. Using relic technologies, the ZERP started the Korsmonk Empire, which today spills over into the neighbouring Theta Borealis sector. Their homeworld of Teth and their race name of Jaibok are only dimly remembered. The exact location of Teth is lost. A few thousand years ago, just prior to the ZERP regaining the secret of jump drive, a splinter group of pacifists exiled themselves from Vetch. They travelled by sublight sleeper ship until they happened upon Yuri in the Spin of Marches, shortly before the arrival of human colonists. Today the Zerf, or Zerfani as they call themselves, coexist peacefully in a fully integrated society with humans on Yuri. Their memories of their brother Zerp, now only described in myth and stories. For sophont generation, here are the key facts. The Jaibok were originally from a mid-sized world with a K2 main sequence star. The Zerp branch is, not strictly speaking, native of Vetch, nor is the Zerf branch, strictly speaking, native of Yori. They are strong and have good endurance, but due to faster maturation, they have lower education. They are basically humanoid with claws and a tail. On page 547 there is a worksheet called a fill form. It has several parts. Here is one. The large number refers to the rules section, in this case section 4, which is on the following page. The secondary letters refer to the chart or table within that section. Let's begin by adding some of the known details. The sophont rules offer a cut-down version of system generation, but we'll pass on that today. The original star was a K2 main sequence star. For homeworld, SAHPG means that were we generating a homeworld at this time, we only need to generate the size, atmosphere, hydrosphere, population and government. But since we already have the whole UPP, we might as well add it. The Jaibok are now extinct on their homeworld. The habitable zone for a K2 main sequence star is orbit 2. We want a temperate world, so we'll stick the homeworld in the habitable zone. It won't be a satellite. We mark the climate as temperate. Next we examine specifics of the proto-sophont. A flux roll of 0, plus 1 for the world's hydrosphere being 6 or more, gives us a forest terrain. Another 1D roll tells us it is a walker. Actually, for forests that's the only option. All the die rolls for forests say walker. If we didn't already know that this animal was an omnivore eater, we would roll flux on the niche column of table C, getting omnivore, and then roll flux on the omnivore column. The flux roll for the terrain is also the terrain modifier on the omnivore column. Walkers breathe atmosphere only, no water. The fill form lists this as coming from table C, but it's actually from table B. The species spectra, what light does the animal see in, is found by checking the home star against the census table B on page 554. Spectrums are covered in more detail on page 201. Jybot can see well in the cerise, red and green bands, and also somewhat in the blue and aglow bands. For contrast, here is the human species spectra. Note that while Jybot might struggle with deep purples, they can just about see infrared or heat. Now we determine the characteristics. This will feed straight into character generation should we want to create a Jybot character. Like most games, Traveller characters have 6 characteristics, but what is a little unusual is that in Traveller 5, what characteristics are used varies from sophont to sophont. Each characteristic is picked by rolling on table A of section 6. By taking the first letter of each characteristic, we get the genetic profile. In this case it is SDEIES, just like it is for humans. Now we find the number of dice to use by rolling on table B of section 6. Note that if the number of dice is 4 or more, then the first 2 dice automatically roll max. So 4D should be rolled as 12 plus 2D, 5D should be rolled as 12 plus 3D, and so on. In this case, there are no exceptions like that. "2D rolls are used to find the gender and or caste of a specific character, but the 2D tables must be generated for each sophont race. In the fill form, the left column is for caste, the right is for gender. Since the Jybot do not have castes, their C6 characteristic is social standing, we will skip that part and go straight to gender, section 8. A flux roll on the structure column of table A indicates a standard dual gender model. Using the table above table A, we transfer the listed genders into the first slots of our sophont's gender table. Gender 1 is female, gender 2 is male. For the remaining slots, we roll flux dice on the dual column of table A. Now we have our 2D Jybot gender table. By looking at the probabilities of each roll, we can see that statistically there should be 2 male Jybot for every female Jybot. Some sopfonts have a definite gender bias in various characteristics, and these now have to be worked out. The fill form can handle up to 6 genders, but we just have 2. We fill in gender 1 and gender 2, and note that the gender 1 is our baseline. Other genders, or the other gender in this case, will vary up or down from the gender 1 baseline. There is no C1 or strength bias for gender 2. There is no C2 or dexterity bias for gender 2. No bias for C3, or C4, or C5, or C6. Finally, we need to determine when gender is assigned and if it is fixed. Gender is usually set at birth, but in some races it is set after life stage 2, i.e. after puberty. When gender is not set at birth, the being is neuter until puberty is reached. But in this case, 2 flux rolls on table C indicate that gender is set at birth and remains fixed. Section 9 covers the life cycle of the sophont, when it is grown up, when it starts to deteriorate and age. Table A of section 9 has a separate column for each life stage. A flux roll on that will determine the number of 4-year terms that life stage typically lasts for. Infancy is always half a term. The number of terms can be multiplied by 4 to get the number of years for each life stage, and the grand total is the life expectancy of the sophont. As can be seen here, Jybot mature quite quickly, reaching adulthood 4 years sooner than humans. This doesn't leave much time for schooling. The original description of the ZERF specified a -2 education penalty. Perhaps that is the price for leaving school early. we'll defer deciding on that for now. Different sophont races will perceive the world around them differently. The senses are covered in detail in their own chapter starting on page 197. A flux roll is made to see if the sophont has a sense of vision or is blind. If it does, then the second flux roll determines the basic ability constant and the bands in which the sophont sees it added to the action stream. The bands were already noted at the end of the environment section. They were dependent on the spectra of the star under which the sophont evolved. Although a Jybok will struggle seeing deep purples, overall its vision is superior to that of a human, and its borderline heat sense is a definite advantage. A flux roll is made to see if the sophont has a sense of hearing or is deaf. If it does, then a second flux roll determines the basic ability constant. The next two digits, also determined by flux rolls, define the frequency midpoint and the span of frequencies up and down the sophont can hear. In this case, the midpoint of 8 corresponds to 256 Hz, also known in music as middle C, and the span of 4 means the lowest sound the sophont can hear is 16 Hz, while the highest is 4000 Hz. Put in human terms, a Jybok can hear pitches as high as a human, but also can hear pitches considerably lower than a human can. The voice of a Jybok is also centered around middle C, but with a much narrower range. In fact, the range of frequencies a Jybok can make is identical to that of a human. A flux roll is made to see if the sophont has a sense of smell or is anosmic. If it does, then the second flux roll determines the basic ability constant, and a third flux roll determines its sharpness. The Jybok sense of smell is inferior to a human. All creatures have a sense of touch, though a flux roll for the basic ability constant and another for the sensitivity is required. The Jybok has a phenomenal sense of touch when compared to humans, both in overall ability and in sensitivity. A flux roll is made to determine if the sophont has a sense of energy field awareness. If it does, then a second flux roll determines the basic ability constant, and a third flux roll determines its acuity. This is not an ability humans have, but the Jybok are very good at sensing electrical and magnetic fields in their vicinity. A flux roll is made to see if the sophont has a sense of life perception. If it does, then a second flux roll determines the basic ability constant, and a third and fourth flux roll determine tone and poise. This is not an ability humans have, and neither do the Jybok. If a sophont race is naturally deaf, then it's unlikely that a verbal language would develop. Instead, some other medium needs to be used, depending on the range of senses available. In this case, the Jybok are not deaf, and so a verbal language did develop. Having established a verbal language is used, we need to describe the voice. Is it whistles and clicks, or musical, or what? Making a flux roll and a 1D roll on the Types of Voices table in the bottom right corner of section 12 clarifies that the Jybok's voice is standard and firm. So what does our alien sophont look like? First, we'll make a flux roll on the symmetry column of table A. The options are bilateral, trilateral, radial or asymmetrical. A Jybok has bilateral symmetry. Next, we will begin to define the shape of the sophont with a flux roll on the head and torso column of table A. This might look like two columns, but it's actually one. There are a series of letter codes. H stands for head and T stands for torso. B is for brain, so HB means the brain is in the head, while TB means the brain is in the torso. S is for senses, the eyes and ears, and can also either be in the head or torso. Finally, N means no head. These are actually organised in only three combinations. HBS plus T, the brain and senses are in the head. HS plus TB, the senses are in the head but the brain is in the torso. Or N plus TBS. There is no head, and therefore brain and senses are in the torso. HBST indicates the sophont has a head with a brain and senses, and also a torso. Next we roll flux for the upper limb group and flux for the lower limb group. There are 5 different pairs of upper and lower limb group columns depending on the creature's locomotion. In this case we use the walker columns. For the walker upper or front, the options are AA, a pair of arms and another pair of arms, AN, a pair of arms and nothing else, LL, a pair of legs and another pair of legs, LN, a pair of legs and nothing else, and AL, a pair of arms and a pair of legs. And AN indicates a pair of arms. Now we roll for the lower or rear limb group. LN indicates a pair of legs. So far this is a fairly standard humanoid, but is there a tail? Yes, and not just a vestigial one either. Next we make 5 flux rolls on table B. On each one there is a +1 if the sophont is a swimmer and a -1 if the sophont is a flyer. Note that front or upper limbs, whether arms or legs, end in manipulators. Rear or lower limbs do not. When a leg has a manipulator, it is dual purpose, i.e. it also acts as a foot. There are just a few details left to decide. Adding up the number of physical characteristic dice, C1 plus C2 plus C3, and if C2 is grace or agility, it counts as half. If C3 is stamina, it counts as double. And if C3 is vigor, it counts as half. Multiply the result by 12 and you get the size. Size is the number of litres in volume and is the number of kilograms of mass. A Jaibok averages 96 compared to 72 for humans. Note that if C1 was 4D or greater, then the size will be bulked up to a much larger number. Choosing a body form profile of 9 allows us to determine the height. The size divided by 1000, then multiplied by the square of the body form profile, taking the cube root, gives the height in meters. So a Jaibok is 1.98 meters tall and weighs 96 kilograms. Compared with a target from the original material of 2 meters tall and 140 to 150 kilograms, we have the right height, but we are a little underweight. The racial scent is QOL. Q is the primary smell, O is the overtone, and L is the nuance. Additionally, there is a gender differentiator. Females are the baseline, males have a touch of W. A flux roll plus 1D roll on the special abilities table of section 12 indicates no sophont-based special abilities. Rolling again indicates no gender-based special abilities either. As there are no castes, there are no castes-based special abilities. There are no castes. Finally, note the gender information from before. This still leaves the Jaibok's fast maturation versus education issue from before. As this is a cultural issue and there are no rules for this, I'm inclined to say that Zerp from Veg start their careers at age 14 and have a -2 penalty to education. Meanwhile, any Zerf from Yori with an education 7 or greater may choose to leave school earlier with a -2 education penalty or continue as normal. Thanks for watching.